6 o'clock on the East Coast. The polls have closed in 2 states, Indiana and Kentucky, and CNN is able to make its first call of the night. In Indiana, George W. Bush, the winner in a state that has only voted Democratic for president once in 60 years. In the state of Kentucky, something of a bellwether state, voted for the winning presidential candidate every year since 1964. Another win for George W. Bush. Looking at the electoral map, it is still very early. But putting these 2 states together, 20 electoral votes tallied up under the name of Texas Governor George W. Bush.
7 o'clock, the polls have closed in certain states, and CNN is looking at what is going on in Florida. This race between Gore and Bush, too close to call, Jeff.
This is the one we'll be watching all night. Gore made 19 visits to the state, Bush 13. They poured in millions of dollars. 4th biggest prize, and it's up for grabs.
Mike McCurry says what's going on tonight is a ground war, a massive one, and look at this. Look at the war in Georgia. Vice President Gore, Governor Bush, this race for CNN at this hour, too close to call.
And this has got to be a shocker in Austin. They had this race put away in their pocket for weeks, if not months. We'll see.
Let's go to Thomas Jefferson State. What's happening in Virginia? Again, the race, too close to call.
Bernie, Virginia has not voted for a Democrat for president since Lyndon Johnson in 1964. It is the heart of the Republican base in the South. They should have won this one going away.
In New Hampshire, Governor Bush lost the primary there, but right now it's neck and neck between his opponent and himself. Looking at South Carolina with its 8 electoral votes, Governor Bush has won another southern state tonight. And in Vermont, Vice President Gore wins Vermont's 3 electoral votes. Now, for your viewers watching our coverage, this is the electoral map. Every time we call states, we will tell you what the totals are, and it's Governor Bush 28 electoral votes, Vice President Gore 3 at this very early hour in our election night coverage.
Some stunning numbers, I think. Well, maybe stunning is too strong a word, but some real surprises here, Bernie. I think that all of us are sitting back a little bit at the news that we can't call Georgia. We're not able to call Virginia. This is a state, as Jeff suggested, has gone Republican how many times? 11 out of the last 12 presidential elections.
Only Lyndon Johnson took it, and we should emphasize, this doesn't mean that we think it's going the other way. It just means right now we don't think we can call it. But given how certain all of us were that Virginia and Georgia were going for Bush, it's a little surprising.
Bernard Shaw, my colleague.
CNN is going to report a call in Virginia. Virginia, CNN declares, goes to Texas Governor George Bush. This is just in. 13 electoral votes in Thomas Jefferson State.
Well, that is no surprise, and I think, Mary, you were prescient and fairly, not the longest shot of the night. That a state that hadn't voted for a Democrat for president since Lyndon Johnson would probably tilt in that direction. It may well be that we just want to say that we are not being, we're being cautious enough so that we know what we're doing.
It's 7:30 p.m. on the East Coast, where the polls have closed in Ohio, North Carolina, and West Virginia. And to show you the extent of the ground war between these 2 gentlemen, we are not able to call Ohio yet in the presidential race for the White House. Too close to call in Ohio. Too close to call in the Tar Heel state of North Carolina with its 14 electoral votes up. And too close to call in West Virginia with its 5 electoral votes.
And as we look at the electoral map, we are obviously putting none of these states in anybody's column, but we should note once again that in any puzzle that adds up to the White House for George W. Bush, Ohio and North Carolina have to be in that puzzle. West Virginia, which is a predominantly Democratic state, is one of those states that the Republicans thought they could take away from the Democrats.
Wherever you see yellow, that's a uh-oh. We can't tell you anything about that state, Judy.
Ohio is a state, as we know, that has no Republican has ever won the White House without Ohio. We can say the same thing about Illinois, which we'll be talking about in the next hour or so. 2 states, at least symbolically important for George W. Bush. Just because we cannot call Ohio right now doesn't mean it's not going to end up in his corner later. But for the time being, as Bernie said, still very hard fought there on the ground.
I'm getting some information. CNN now declares that Governor Bush has won another state in the South. This one, Georgia, and its 13 electoral votes.
expected, and that is an important win for Governor Bush.
And it illustrates what we were pointing out. The fact that we say a state is too close to call doesn't necessarily mean that the state is really in play or it's 50-50. It simply means at that moment we can't do it. Georgia is a state that President Clinton contested, actually carried it in one of his...
in 92, by 1 percentage point.
Right, and then lost it by a couple. But it is certainly no shock that these southern states ought to be falling like dominoes for George W. Bush. I mean, ever since the Civil Rights Revolution of '64, the South has been a state that's very hard for Democrats to win, and you've got to be from the South or a border state to do it. Carter, Clinton.
This is how our electoral map looks at 7:34 Eastern Time. Governor Bush far ahead of Vice President Gore, 54 electoral votes to 3 so far. And the yellow, you see, wherever you see yellow on our electoral map, that means that that state in particular is too close to call.
A big call to make. CNN announces that we call Florida in the Al Gore column. This is a state both campaigns desperately wanted to win. The state of Florida fought over very hard, the state with a Republican governor named Bush, the brother of the Republican nominee, Jeff Greenfield. This is something that is not making the Bush campaign happy tonight.
This is a roadblock the size of a boulder to George W. Bush's path to the White House. They had counted these 25 electoral votes from the moment George Bush entered the campaign before he was even nominated. Democrats have a very tough time in Florida, whether it was Social Security, the turnout, Joe Lieberman. Now, George W. Bush has to look to Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and those smaller states really become critical.
8 o'clock on the East Coast, 16 states, the polls have closed, the District of Columbia, and we have an important call to make in the state of Michigan. But we're showing you Texas. No surprise there, George Bush wins. The stunner at this hour is that we can call Al Gore the winner in the Wolverine state.
This is the state where Reagan Democrats were born, working class people who went Republican on values issues and then on the economy and then on strength. Clinton got them back in '92 and '96, a bitterly contested state. Al Gore takes it, and the map for George Bush gets even tougher.
In the state of Pennsylvania, the Keystone State, too close to call at this hour, still being battled out by the Vice President and Governor Bush.
Another one, this one Bush, it looks like is going to have to win to build his margin.
In Illinois, Missouri, too close to call. This one and we're skipping ahead to Illinois. Al Gore, the winner there.
These Midwest battleground states, which George Bush's campaign thought they were going to be very competitive in, they haven't won one yet. And with Michigan and Illinois and Pennsylvania too close to call, but you add Michigan and Illinois to Florida, and Al Gore's people must be feeling very good about now.
And again, in the state of Missouri, it's 11 electoral votes still being fought out. This is a state where the governor running for the Senate, Mel Carnahan, killed tragically in a plane crash. Through this whole election in this state, really upside down for some time.
And again, this is one of those states we always point to because except for 1956, it has gone with the winner in every election since 1900.
In New Jersey, CNN able to say that Al Gore is the winner. George Bush was in there campaigning this very weekend. But it appears that Al Gore has won New Jersey in its 15 electoral votes. Massachusetts, no surprise, a state the Democrats can count on in just about every election you can think of. Al Gore winning and taking its 12 electoral votes. The state of Tennessee, it's Al Gore's home state, but he is not able to count on it. Jeff Greenfield, it's too close to call.
But again, in the Bush calculation, when they told us, well, we can win without Florida, a state like Tennessee was one of the states they had in mind. He went there, kind of drew a line in the sand, said Al Gore may win Washington, D.C., but he's not winning Tennessee. We can't say one way or the other, but if this one doesn't fall for Bush, it's trouble.
Maryland, the free state, reliably Democratic, and Al Gore wins that, takes its 10 electoral votes. Alabama, a state I guess we thought George Bush we'd be able to say at this hour, another one too close to call. Connecticut, Al Gore, the winner in the Constitution state, and its 8 electoral votes. Oklahoma, its 8 electoral votes go to Texas Governor George W. Bush, the governor of the neighboring state of Texas. Mississippi, another win for the Texas governor, and its 7 electoral votes. Kansas, Bob Dole's home state, we just heard from him, solidly in George Bush's corner, and it's 6 electoral votes. Up in the far northeastern corner of the United States, Maine, it's 4 electoral votes still up for grabs, still being battled out between Gore and Bush. And finally, the nation's capital, the District of Columbia, no surprise at all, Al Gore the winner. And finally, Delaware in this 8 o'clock count, Al Gore the winner. That is a state where George Bush had been making threatening noises, but it looks like Al Gore has called it. Here is how, and we want to add that we are able at this hour to say the state of North Carolina is in George Bush's corner. This is a poll that closed about half an hour ago in North Carolina, and it's 14 electoral votes go to George Bush. Looking at the map, the national map at this hour, you need 270 to win to become president. At this hour, it couldn't be any closer. I guess it could be by 2 votes. But Bush has 121, Al Gore at 119. It is a cliffhanger, gentlemen. And I'm just told that I've just been made a liar. We are able to call the state of Alabama for Texas Governor George W. Bush. Governor Bush takes the 9 electoral votes in the state of Alabama, also known as the Heart of Dixie.
Also, CNN is calling the Senate race in New Jersey. Millionaire, multimillionaire John Corzine, who spent more than $60 million, has won the open seat, turning back the challenge by Republican Bob Franks. Corzine, a big winner in New Jersey, having spent lots of money in the process.
That's a hold.
I was going to say, goes to show that for $55 or $60 million, you can buy your way into the United States Senate.
Well, in fact, it's most important in terms of the balance of power. That's Frank Lautenberg's seat, so we count that as a hold for the Democrats. But unlike Al Checkey in California or Michael Huffington in California, this enormous record-busting sum literally paid off.
Back to the race for the White House. If you're just joining our coverage, this is the electoral vote count right now. It's this close. That's right. These figures are correct. Governor Bush with 130 votes. Vice President Al Gore with 119.
Speaking of states that we are not able to call, I'm going to wait 13 seconds until I can say this. In the state of Arkansas, where the polls are closing literally as I speak, the home state of President Bill Clinton, we are not able to call. The polls close in Arkansas at 8:30 Eastern Time, and as of this hour, this moment, we are not able to call the result. The land of opportunity. And looking once again, a quick check of the electoral map. George W. Bush racking up 130 electoral votes. His states are in red. Al Gore, the vice president, 119 electoral votes. His states are in blue. And as Bill Schneider just very carefully pointed out, the states in yellow, we are not able to call them yet. It doesn't mean that they will end up close. It just means we don't have enough information at this hour. Even though the polls are closed, we don't have enough information to put them in one corner or another. And we are able to call Pennsylvania for Vice President Al Gore. 23 electoral votes go to the Vice President, Jeff Greenfield, Bernie Shaw. This is a major disappointment for George W. Bush, and Jeff makes it all the harder for him to put together a winning combination.
It absolutely does. It means that of the states that are now undecided, we can begin to say that George Bush has to more or less run the table on them. He has got to win Ohio. He has got to win Tennessee and Arkansas. He has got to win Missouri. The polls close at 9 o'clock. New York was never in play. The West Coast hasn't been favorable to the Republicans for a while. So with the loss of Pennsylvania and Michigan and Illinois and Florida, all battleground states, the states that we have left in yellow are the place where George W. Bush's candidacy must prevail if he's to survive across the Mississippi River. It's going to be tough.
Very tough, Jeff. And for the first time tonight, Al Gore has gone up on Governor Bush. The vice president, 145 electoral votes. The governor from Texas, 130 electoral votes. And as you say, poll closings coming up at the top of the hour, and we'll see what happens.
Al Gore.
Staying here in the Empire State, CNN declares the winner, Vice President Gore, picking up New York's 33 electoral votes. Continuing with our poll closings now, Wisconsin, we're not prepared to call this yet. Wisconsin's 11 electoral votes, very, very important this night. In Minnesota, also the same case here, we are not prepared to call Minnesota. When we can, of course, we will. Louisiana, Governor Bush winning tonight there. 9 electoral votes going into his column. In Arizona, again, we're not prepared to call this one, nor are we prepared to call it in Colorado. Colorado with 8 electoral votes hanging out there. Governor Bush, CNN declares the winner in Nebraska. 5 more electoral votes for the Texas governor. We are not going to call New Mexico yet. We'll come back to New Mexico. Rhode Island put in the Gore column, the vice president winning 4 more electoral votes. In North Dakota, Governor Bush wins those 3 electoral votes. As he does in South Dakota, 3 more electoral votes. As he does in Wyoming, still 3 more electoral votes. Now, this is the map as we look at it at this hour. The vice president, 192 electoral votes. Governor Bush, 153.
Bernie, it looks like 11 states we are not able to call yet, but as you point out, the total, Al Gore inching ever closer to 270, but George Bush still within striking distance. But the big story tonight, in addition to watching how these states tally up, is how many of them are being fought out, you know, whatever term you want to use, whether it's a cliche, hand-to-hand combat or whatever, they're still fighting it out on the ground.
It also looks, when you look at that electoral map and you look at that looming West Coast that's been so kind to the Democrats for the last 8 years, that George W. Bush is going to have to win almost everything that is still in play to have a chance because of what may be looming in California.
Major battleground call. Governor Bush is the winner in Ohio, and he grabs the Buckeye State's 21 electoral votes.
This is a state that he absolutely had to have, given what happened in Florida, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. It is also a state Republicans have to have because they just don't win the White House without it, especially with the loss in Illinois. And it now suggests that there is at least a little more optimism, not optimism, but at least hope on the Bush camp. That's right, hope. Because if you look at all the other states, before we get west, if Bush can win Tennessee, Arkansas, Missouri, Wisconsin, Minnesota, if the electoral map begins to stabilize.
It's also a
CNN
state.
is making another call right now. Governor Bush moving very quickly in Tennessee, embarrassing Vice President Gore by snatching his state's 11 electoral votes.
Yes.
We wish to make a correction about something that was said earlier. I believe that Woodrow Wilson got elected president without carrying his home state of New Jersey.
The second time.
Yeah, that's the second time, in 1916.
So any of you taking notes, please jot that down on your chart. But this
And there was James Polk who won the presidency without Tennessee.
Yes, but having won Tennessee, having won the vice president's home state, this scenario for Bush now begins to look at least conceivable. You can see the Bush people saying, okay, if we take Arkansas, if we take Missouri, if we take Wisconsin, if we take Minnesota and Iowa, this is what it's come down to, then we get to the West with enough electoral votes that we can withstand a loss in California.
But CNN declares that Vice President Al Gore wins Minnesota, wins Minnesota's 10 electoral votes. And you were just making the point about his voting strength in various parts of the state and surprisingly having done well outside in the suburbs.
Doing well in the Minneapolis suburbs, and Ralph Nader was not as much a factor there as he was down in Wisconsin. Now let's talk about Missouri. Missouri is a crucial state. Okay, we don't have time for Missouri, we'll do it later.
Well, we always have time for the Show Me State, but we just want to talk about some of the things behind that victory in Minnesota. But here now is the very latest count. Vice President Gore still slightly ahead of Governor Bush in the electoral vote total, 192 to 185. CNN just declaring Mr. Gore the winner in Minnesota.
And if you look at this map once again and cast your eyes out west to where everybody has expected for most of this campaign to happen in California, you begin to see that the states begin to close around the hopes of George W. Bush. There are simply fewer and fewer places where he can pick up enough votes to get to 270 unless an amazing upset happens out west.
And stand by. CNN right now is moving our earlier declaration of Florida back to the too close to call column. 25 very big electoral votes in the home state of the governor's brother, Jeb Bush, are hanging in the balance. This no longer is a victory for Vice President Gore. We're moving it back. into
waiter.
the too close to
One order of
call.
One
Crow,
order of
please.
Crow, yes.
Now, can we just review
Well,
this again about how...
Well, I think in the fullness of time tonight we're going to have an explanation for this, but we're reporting to you what's happening.
Well, what we're being told by our executive producer, Sid Bedingfield, is that based on the information we have from Florida, we don't entirely trust all the information that we have, and I assume the VNS service, and Bill, you can explain all this, is part of that decision.
That's right. The networks and the Associated Press collaborate in supporting a research service.
Because it is 10 o'clock on the East Coast, and polls have closed in 5 states, and we are able to call George W. Bush the winner in the state of Utah. He takes its 5 electoral votes. In the state of Idaho, another win for George W. Bush. Rack up 4 more electoral votes for the governor of the state of Texas. Nevada is one too close to call. Nevada's 4 electoral votes. We are not able to call that state one way or another. Montana, another check mark there for the governor of Texas, and it's 3 electoral votes. And the last state with polls to close at this hour, Iowa, the Hawkeye state, it's 7 electoral votes. We are not able to call it. So it just gets more exciting and more exciting. And here is the electoral map. We're going to be looking at this throughout the night. At this hour, with the polls closed in all but 5 states across the United States, we are able to give George W. Bush 197 electoral votes. His states are those in red. Vice President Al Gore, 167 electoral votes. His state's in blue, and all those states in yellow, we don't have enough information yet to give them one way or another. We have a call to make in the state of New Hampshire. CNN declares that Texas Governor George W. Bush will take the 4 electoral votes. Every vote counts, folks. The 4 electoral votes in the state of New Hampshire go to the governor of Texas. So let's look at his total now. He is over the 200 mark at 201 electoral votes. Those are the states in red. Al Gore, 167, the states in blue, and an awful lot of states still in yellow that we are not able to call one way or another. But New Hampshire, a state that Al Gore and George W. Bush both wanted to win, both would have liked to have had.
He lost it in the winter. He won it in the fall.
And McCain had a lot to do with both of those eventualities. New Hampshire looks like a little red, lonely outpost up there in the solid blue Gore Northeast, and McCain had a great deal to do with that. It appears that he helped deliver
Here's
New Hampshire.
another, I'm going to interrupt. We've got another call to make. The state of Missouri, the Show Me State, goes for George W. Bush, 11 electoral votes in his corner. It's racking up. If it was 202, this makes it 213 for George W. Bush. It's getting interestinger and interestinger, as they said in Alice in Wonderland. Larry, we do have a state to call. The state of West Virginia, CNN calls, is in the corner for George W. Bush. The Texas governor takes West Virginia's 5 electoral votes. This is based not only on interviews with voters as they left the polling places, but also on our analysis of key sample precincts throughout the state. Now let's look again at the totals on the electoral map. 270 needed to win at this hour. It's 10:12 Eastern Time. We are giving George W. Bush 217 electoral votes. Those states in red, we're giving Al Gore 167. The states in blue, the ones we are not able to call yet, are the states in yellow. We do have a call to make. CNN says that the state of New Mexico goes into the corner of Al Gore. Vice President Gore picks up the 5 electoral votes in the state of New Mexico. That is and that adds another handful to the total we give in Al Gore. That blue state that's popped up there on just to the left of Texas is New Mexico, of course, and we've now given it to Al Gore. So the total for George W. Bush, 217. For Al Gore, 172.
It's 11 o'clock on the East Coast in the United States, and CNN is prepared to make the following calls with the polls closing. Most of them. Al Gore has won California's big prize, 54 electoral votes. Farther west in Hawaii, 4 electoral votes going to the vice president. The situation in Oregon, it is too close to call. We cannot call that race yet, nor can we call the one in Washington State, with its 11 electoral votes. Looking to the moment at our electoral map, the vice president, by winning California, goes up over Governor Bush. Mr. Gore, 230 electoral votes. Mr. Bush, 217 electoral votes.
California, that is a state in which George Bush made a run and spent millions of dollars late in the campaign. It raised a few eyebrows. Some thought it was because they had a chance to carry it. Others said it was payback because the California Republicans were among the first group that went 2 years ago to Austin and asked Governor Bush to run and asked him to pledge that if he did run, he would not desert California the way his father and Senator Dole did. Now, in Oregon and Washington, there are two states where the nadir factor may or may not come into effect. And once again, we take two second-tier states, put them in the undecided column. With everything but Alaska reporting, you can see that the fate of the White House is in the hands of about 8 or 9 states that we cannot yet call.
CNN is going to make a call in the Southwest, an important call. Colorado has been won by Governor Bush. Governor Bush taking Colorado's 8 electoral votes. Please continue.
So by, let's see, the tally, the total then is 225 George W. Bush to 231. Who said this wasn't going to be a close night, a close election?
Yeah,
it is
Colorado.
a close election.
Colorado is the state that switched from Clinton in 1992 to Dole in 1996. So it could have gone either way, and it looks like it stuck with the Republicans as it did with Bob Dole.
And it is declaring another race in Nevada. Governor Bush wins 4 more electoral votes. He picks up Nevada's 4 electoral votes. And this is the tally as it stands now. Can it get any closer? Vice President Gore with 230 electoral votes. Governor Bush with 229 electoral votes. Let me interrupt our conversation. Arizona now, CNN declares, goes to Governor Bush. Arizona's 8 electoral votes in the governor's column.
And that is a significant win because Arizona had voted Republican in every election from 1948 for since Harry Truman. It voted for Harry Truman, then it voted Republican in every election after that until it voted for Bill Clinton in 1996. And now it's gone back into the Republican column.
12 o'clock in the east coast of the United States, and we are able to make a call in the last state to close its polls tonight. Alaska, the land of the midnight sun, goes to George W. Bush. It's 3 electoral votes. No real surprise at all here. This state has only voted for a Democratic candidate once since it became a state in the year 1959. So here's the total. George W. Bush, 240 electoral votes. His are the red states on that map. They are from east almost all the way to the west. Al Gore, 231 electoral votes. The states in blue, counting California, and going all the way over to the state of Maine. It is a close
Just
election.
6.
We are now able to say the state of Arkansas is in George W. Bush's corner. The home state of President Bill Clinton and its 6 electoral votes fall to George W. Bush, giving the Texas governor an electoral vote total of 246, putting him only 24 votes away from becoming the next president of the United States.
Florida has 25. And Florida, with the state of Florida, if it went to George Bush, he'd be the winner.
Or some combination of these other states that we're looking at.
So,
Washington, Wisconsin,
Oregon and Iowa.
And let's look at that list again. We were just able to take Arkansas off. We are left with Washington and Wisconsin, 11 each, Oregon 7, Iowa 7, Florida 25.
Don't tell me this isn't
We are calling the state of Washington for Al Gore, and it's 11 electoral votes. We just heard John King say the Gore campaign expected to win the state of Washington, and we are at CNN now able to give those electoral votes to the vice president based on our examination of exit polling and the key precincts. Now here's the total. George W. Bush, 246. Al Gore, 242. You just heard John King say the Gore people now believe that there is no mathematically, statistically possible way that Al Gore can get to 270 without the state of Florida, unless one of the states that have already been called for George W. Bush is taken back.
If Al Gore were to win Oregon, Wisconsin, and Iowa, and Florida went to Bush, Bush would win the White House 271 to 267. You think it can be closer than that?
Because we're making a call in Iowa, in the Hawkeye state. CNN declares that Al Gore has won Iowa's 7 electoral votes. When we last reported, this was how the electoral map looked, but now if you add Iowa's 7, Mr. Gore now has gone back on top. The vice president with 249 electoral votes to Governor Bush's 246.
And we can now say with absolute certainty, I believe, that unless one of these states that we've called changes, whoever wins Florida will be the next president of the United States.
That's right.
And the states still outstanding: Florida, 25 electoral votes. Here you see it. Oregon, 7 electoral votes. And the Badger State, Wisconsin, 11 electoral votes. George Bush, governor of Texas, will become the 43rd president of the United States. At 18 minutes past 2 o'clock Eastern Time, CNN declares that George Walker Bush has won Florida's 25 electoral votes, and this should put him over the top.
That's right, Bernie. With Florida, he gets 271 electoral votes, one more than he needs. What happens in Oregon and Wisconsin now becomes irrelevant unless by some remarkable miracle some state changes course. This was the closest election electorally, it looks like, in this, perhaps in this century. Yeah. But George Bush has been declared by CNN the next president of the United States.
And if Al Gore takes Wisconsin and Oregon, he will win by 1 electoral vote. That's only happened once that I know of, and that was 1876.
George Walker.
No, let's look at the map, and you go ahead and report that. But I have to wonder, if Gore is not going to talk, then obviously the governor from Texas.
Well, maybe we'll be hearing from Candy Crowley momentarily. Let's just point out that Florida has gone from too close to call to Gore, to too close to call to Bush, to too close to call. I suppose Nader can have some hopes that he might carry Florida in about a day or two. But this is truly amazing.
And that's, as campaign chairman William Daley indicated, with 99.9% of the votes counted.
That's right.
This is the electoral map, as we said. The state of Florida, which originally we had put into the Gore column, and it was back to too close to call. Then it went into the Bush column. Now it is once again too close to call, and this is the corrected electoral vote total at this hour, 4:11 a.m., November the 8th, the year 2000. Al Gore, 249, George W. Bush, 246. All this because the state of Florida will undergo an automatic, they've announced they will conduct an automatic recount because the vote in that state was under 0.5% difference.
And CNN believes there will not be a winner determined in Florida until later today, Wednesday, when there will be an automatic recount.
And I'll tell you one thing that's going to be recounted, and that is the way we count votes, because I have a hunch that there's going to be an enormous amount of scrutiny about a system that calls a state for both candidates, and then at 3 o'clock in the morning winds up for neither.
I want to clarify something. If I left the impression that we know there will be a recount, let me amend that to say it appears that there will be a recount in the state of Florida. And I think it's also important to say the gentleman we talked to from the election division in the state of Florida said they still need to wait for, what is it, overseas ballots, absentee ballots, and he said that is a 10-day process.
I think I left the impression that there would be a definite recount.
Well, what we know in Florida
keyword is appears.
Bill Daley told us as much. What he said is, and what Mr. Cass said was, when the vote comes in, and it's 0.5%, which it is way less than that, there is an automatic recount triggered. So I think the original impression you left was almost certainly correct in the first place, Judy.
Unless one of the candidates says they don't want it, and believe me, they both, I'm sure one of the candidates will want it.
Welcome back as we continue our coverage of election 2000. CNN is now ready to make the call on Wisconsin, which had up until now been a state too close to call. We are now calling that. Al Gore's state, Al Gore taking the state of Wisconsin and its 11 electoral votes. That's just coming in here to the CNN.
That's right, which means that Al Gore needs 10 more electoral votes. George W. Bush needs 24, which once again brings it down to Florida's 25.
It doesn't change the scenario at all, because no matter what happens, Florida has got to be the state that makes the final call.
We're still waiting for Oregon, but still, doesn't matter now that Wisconsin is in at this point. All right, 270 electoral votes needed.
That's